Another thing I was going to say that's fantastic about the rural communities that we work with is we often find that we will donate equipment to a school and the community will come together, find their own ways to grow it. So a business will come in and fund some additional equipment, or they will re-up something that's needed, like filament for 3D printers, or someone will come in and offer to talk about what they do professionally to engage the students. So these communities do a really beautiful job of supporting the equipment that we donate on their end and just fostering that love within the school for the students for this.
There's some initial investment and people see the results on it, and then other people want to come in and jump on board and invest in the thing. And rural communities are pretty good about coming together for those sorts of things, and it just needs a little bit of a spark, and we're happy to provide it a lot of the time.
Use like sort of a science analogy, it's like a catalyst, right? Like you just need something to get it kicked off. And then once it's kicked off and people see that something's being used and that there's value in it, that's when people come together. And I love that story. Chris, I wonder too if you can share a minute ago you said, I think it was that talent's everywhere, but opportunity is not. Can you elaborate a little bit more for like what's the life of a typical rural kid who may not have any experience or knowledge or exposure to technology, may not have any idea what the future can be for them, and might be stuck in like a tough home. Maybe it's a drug addicted home, maybe it's full of abuse, maybe it's a good home, I don't know. But can you just elaborate a little bit more about like why the RTF is so powerful to change the lives of kids?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the story I can speak best to is probably mine, right? I grew up in West Kentucky, and I was that kid. I was that kid who I wasn't really interested in sports. I wasn't doing a ton of extracurriculars. I wasn't even really the best student. But gosh, you put me in front of a computer, and I was mesmerized. Whether it was just playing games or writing code or networking things together. I mean, I was hooked, and from an early age. But there just wasn't a lot of opportunity for me to take that any further. I had an internet connection, a 56K internet connection, but internet connection nonetheless. And so I could learn a little bit, but there weren't businesses in the area that I could, really get internships or find mentors at a young age. There certainly weren't a lot of other, even adults who were technically inclined, who were around and available to mentor me or provide input or steer me in the right direction. So it was a little bit lost in some ways. And you add to the fact that just by nature of living in a rural area, you're much more likely to live in a state of poverty. You're much more likely to live in a family that's experienced, death at a young age of all sorts of sickness. You're more likely to live in a family that's experienced domestic violence, suicide. All of those things are more prevalent in rural areas for a lot of reasons that are a little bit beyond our scope. But that's what kids are dealing with in these areas. So when, this isn't every kid, but it's a lot of them. And when you struggle with those things at home and you have something you're interested in, but no direction to take it, well, that's so fun. And for most kids, they're not able to get beyond it. They're not really to see a future beyond that. If we're talking, you're in Kentucky and your dad's a coal miner and your uncle was a coal miner and your grandfather was a coal miner, and well, there aren't a lot of coal jobs to be had anymore, and you probably don't want them anyway. So it's hard not to get trapped into those narrow pathways or to see yourself in a future beyond what life has already handed you. And that's kind of the state that a lot of rural kids lived in. I'm fortunate that I was able to eventually get to a future. And for a lot of that is because of teachers. I had a lot of teachers who cared about me and invested time in me. And even though they didn't understand the technology side of things, they help me make some good decisions that led me on a path that led me here. And now I'm able to help other of those kids because, like I said, I've traveled a lot, and but opportunity is not. I was that kid in Graves County, Kentucky. Guarantee there was one the next county over. There's that kid, at least one of them in about every county, usually more than one nowadays. So it's connecting to those kids and creating opportunity for them.
Was that kid in the next county over. I was in Callaway County, literally the next county over, and I was that kid. So, and I think for MSPs listening today, they're like, that was me too. I remember the first time you gave a keynote, Chris, and you're just talking about what you said there exactly. And I'm getting texts rolling in, like, dude, this is me. Like I'm just talking about this. If it were not for me learning of some one thing to share than whatever thought I could. I never had a parent that said, hey, you're a really smart kid, you can do this. I didn't know. And all of a sudden, this has transformed my life for the better. It's transformed my family's life, and it's transformed our community's life. And I love that. Eric, maybe just a question for you. I mean, MSPs as well as anyone out there.
So yeah, living, they're 2 hours south of there's a town known as Canyon City. And Canyon City is known for one thing and one thing only, and that's prisons. The less popular item in Canyon City is they have a Gates rubber factory that makes belts and hoses for cars, and they have a big that makes like sheet metal ductwork and things like that. So growing up there, not me, but I know a lot of people from there. It's you're either going to be a prison guard, or you're going to work in the sheet metal plant, or you're going to work in the rubber and factory plant thing, whatever. So they took an old school down there and they called it Emergent Campus and they converted it and they brought in like all kinds of tech stuff and all that, kind of the same thing, similar along the lines of what RTF is funding. Put that in. What emerged, what we found was, there's all these kids that were like, I was pretty much convinced that when I graduated high school, I was going to be a prison guard, I was going to work at the rubber plant, or I was going to work in the sheet metal plant. Now they actually have an opportunity, and there's a lot of that. Other places that do that. Here's what's really cool is there have been a few startups that have come out of that from kids growing up in that area that are juniors and seniors in high school that have built some companies that have gotten the attention of VCs and actually been funded. So there's a company called RIMO3, RIMO3, that came out of Emergent Campus in Canyon City, Colorado, this little tiny town in Colorado. And had it not been for Emergent Campus, had it not been for things like the Rural Tech Fund, this is like to work in the prison system or somewhere else because nobody would have known, that he even existed or that and he may not even have known those had somebody not put technology in front of him and have been like, wow, this is really cool. And I think I understand this.
You guys, that kid who's going to go on and do things with computers and technology, but it goes even beyond that. We had a great kid who actually won one of our scholarships and his classroom received a grant. This has been a few years back. And he was going to go major in computer science at the University of Kentucky. And he did that. But along the way, he realized that computer science wasn't really for him. He was really interested in politics. What he ended up doing, he ended up getting hired as an intern and would go on to work for the person who ended up getting elected governor in Kentucky. And he would be a science and technology advisor for that person. So here we have a kid who went out and got that education. And now he's working with politicians who aren't experts in technology, and he's serving in that capacity. So it is not directly a technology job per se. He's not, fixing computers or doing cybersecurity investigations, but he has that knowledge and it's influencing other areas of how we live, and it's influencing decision makers around how technology affects our daily lives, which is in almost every way at this point. So we want to certainly reach those kids who are going to work in tech for a living. But beyond that, we also want to give a little bit of a leg up to the kids who will not work in tech for a living, but it's going to be adjacent or at least a part of their jobs to help them be more competitive and ultimately try to make us all a little bit better.
So why it's so important for us when we do donate equipment, we ensure that the equipment is going to be accessible to everybody. So if a project has exclusionary grouping or the equipment is only going to be touched students in gifted classes, or there's some sort of standard, we discuss with those educators ways to make it accessible to everybody, and we ensure that those projects are accessible to entire either classes, grades, schools, or the entire population that can get into the classroom or into the space where we donate the equipment.
Something I get a little bit of flack over every now and then, because we will not donate technology equipment to a school if they're only going to use it for a gifted program or a program that is what we exclusionary. The idea being that, well, I'll put it simply, if you had to be in a gifted program or have a B average to be in a technology club, I wouldn't have been allowed to be in one when I was, in really elementary, middle, or high school. And so what we recognize here, there are a lot of kids out there who just have their thing yet. And we know that when they find their thing, it can unlock all the other things, right? So a kid may be getting poor grades and may be underperforming in school, but when they find technology and they realize that's their thing and they get into it, generally it lifts all their other grades up. It gives them motivation because they can see, again, a future beyond what has otherwise been presented to them. So that's something we really focus on, is making sure that not only putting the stuff in schools, but that everybody has an opportunity to use it, regardless of grades, regardless of any sort of disability.
Yes, I mean, we want our kids to have great grades, but grades are not necessarily indicative of your future capability in life and what you can and can't do. It's just what you said. I haven't seen a better way, and why go through the rigor of school when they don't understand, what it might unlock for them, right? And so I absolutely love that, and that really brings up the other thing we wanted to talk to y'all about is when we first did this thing. I remember the first time I called you up, and I know you'll never say this, but I know what was going through your brain of like, really, are these IT people really going to, like, am I going to spin my wheels skills and nothing's going to happen. And I'll tell you, I was worried about the same thing. I'm like, oh, this is so risky. And we've never like this is well, you were the only one who wasn't nervous wreck. And lo and behold, that first time I think we raised 25K and I was blown away. And we had so much good feedback from Rejection Con that people were like, it was so amazing. So we did it again. I'm like, well, let's do something even more stupid. Let's try to raise 50,000. That will never happen. And, as God is my witness, here we are today having raised way over that. And the vast majority of the people that gave were small dollar increments, whether it was ticket sales that all went to y'all, or it was just extra additional donations, or it was vendors jumping in. And Chris and Claire, we did it. We raised so much money. It's less about the money and more about the impact. And so that's the question I had for you. What's happened since Rejection Con? And do you have any stories of where some of that money has gone and where it's impacted school systems?
Regarding the impact so far from last Rejection Con, we have been funding projects. In Sparta, Missouri, we donated some hummingbird robotics kits. 30 students so far have been impacted with those, and they've been working on incorporating light, sound, and movement to animate characters and objects. In Iowa, we had students buzzing with excitement for a new 3D printer. 120 students are already interacting with that. In Lott, Texas, we donated microbits, and those are going to be used with 145 students from K through 8th, so entire school access there. In Carson, Iowa, we donated Lego spikes. Those are going to impact 360 students in those schools. And aside from those, we were able to fund 29 other projects, and those include computer repair kits, Spheros, Vex Robotics, Makey Makeys, Edison robots, a mobile maker space. And then we've been able to donate some assistive technology. So that includes vision equipment in a couple places, and also C pens, which are technology that actually read text to students. So in total, so far, we have impacted 10,522 students based off of the donation that we received from you all from Rejection Con. It's awesome.
It is so great. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm still trying to get the goosebumps off my arm, right? I mean, when you hear that, it's just such a
So, so 10,000, yeah, 10,000 students. And Wes, something you'd brought up earlier, right? Is that how does this really impact like bringing it back home for all of us in the MSP space, right? MSPs serve SMB and a little bit of mid-market. We're not serving enterprise, we're serving small to medium business and mid-market. That means based on what we do, and what we do is super important, especially to small to medium-sized businesses, we're not hiring MIT grads. We're not hiring somebody that has a choice between Amazon working on AWS, Google working on Gemini, and some going to work for Meta, and then they're like, I think that I'm going to go work for Iconic IT out of the Midwest that serves, plumbers and chiropractors and whatever. So what our sweet spot are these people. And so we can either bring them in and then try to train them on tech, or we can have people that already understand the tech, that are interested to go to work in the tech, that may not have the opportunity to go to MIT or Stanford or Caltech or one of those, and they just want to get out in the world and start working, and they just don't want to work in the lot that was predestined for them, working on the farm, working here, working in an implement store like their parents did. So I think that's kind of the full circle for me, is that, understanding the kind of people that we hire and why this should be so important to the MSP space in helping bring these kids into a world that we want them to participate in.
With our donations that I'd like to note is when we donate technology, it is incredibly important to us that our teachers feel supported, because most of our teachers are learning alongside our students. So we call these our teacher advocates, and they are the best people on the planet. But many of our teachers fill out their grant application and say, I have not interacted with this equipment, but I've seen all these incredible things, and this is what I want to bring to my students. So we work really hard on establishing partnerships with different equipment companies. So Makey Makey, Sphero, Vex, MakerBot, We partner with these organizations and they provide us with professional development for our educators. So we're making sure that we're not just handing them equipment and saying, good luck. We're giving them professional development opportunities, lesson opportunities, and also community engagement opportunities with one another so that they feel supported in bringing this technology into the classroom and learning alongside their students. And often, the experience is equally beneficial for them both. The students are learning so much, but teachers typically say that a few students will rise up and really begin to lead the class and figure out what else they can do with the equipment and new ideas and projects that they can create. And that is a beautiful thing.
10,000 students. The secret here is as well, that's 10,000 students this school year. The equipment's going to be used again next year. And certainly the equipment will eventually age out and there'll be some diminishing returns, but this is going to continue to have an impact to the next round of students as they continue to matriculate through the schools and the classes and the clubs and things like that. So that's very important to us. The other thing I want to mention here is in regard to what was discussed about, a kid from a rural area going off to another school and going and, working for Amazon, for AWS, for one of these big companies. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing to some degree, because let me tell you, as a guy who did that, I followed my career with the Department of Defense for a while and moved off to some other cities. But guess what? I ended up not back in my home, but back in a rural area, right? So the pull to come home is really, really strong. It's not a bad thing if someone is from a rural area, gets some education, goes out, does one of these bigger company style jobs, and then brings that expertise and that knowledge back home. And that's more readily available now than ever because people can work remotely, right? So now you have someone who's making a big salary, spending it in a place where the average salary is a lot lower. That ultimately lifts everybody up. It raises everybody up in that community when that economic investment is being had there. And that's not something that is lost on us in that regard. And I will also say technology is important. I don't have to tell that to this crowd. There's a lot of big time things happening in the world of technology, from AI to cybersecurity and all these things. And I think if we're going to be intellectually honest with ourselves, we want people who think in a lot of different ways tackling these problems. I want people from rural areas in the rooms where decisions are being made about the future of these technologies, how we're going to approach it, and how we're going to solve the big issues that we have with it. A lot of that begins in kindergarten and first grade and second grade, and making sure people have the tools that they need along the path through middle school, through high school, into college, if that's where students choose to go. We need to have people from all different walks of life, all different ways of thinking in those rooms, and rural is certainly a part of that.
Man, absolutely love that. And I love hearing these stories. I love hearing where the impact is going. Let's talk next year. Bob, I know you think I'm crazy. Eric, you do too. But can we do 75,000
Yeah. Yeah.
us? I've got a question, Claire, for you and Chris, whichever you want to take it. What if we did that? What if we could hand 75 to 100 to RTF to invest back into school systems? What could that mean?
When you came to me the first time, I never had any doubts. And when you came to me last year and you said, tell you were a little skeptical. There's a little bit of fear. Not here. We were 100% certain it would happen. And so just like we're 100% certain a bigger goal we can do too. And let me tell you, most of the projects we fund, we really pride ourselves in being very efficient and making a huge impact with a lower investment. A lot of the projects we talked about, our average projects we fund are generally between $500 and $2,500 invested in a school. Again, not a lot for such a huge impact with a large number of students. When we start getting into bigger donation amounts, that allows us to tackle new and interesting types of projects that weren't really always accessible to us, where we can put in, $7,500 or $10,000 into a school or a library and do things like build an entire makerspace that the whole community can access. One project that comes to mind now, where we have a project called Infinite Sky, where students work with some of our partners and us to build CubeSat emulators. So these are little square cube satellites that collect data, and we actually send them up into the stratosphere with high altitude balloons. And the students, we live stream it, and the students collect their data and they analyze it. And it's this really cool space type thing that allows this student to get exposure to all sorts of technology and engineering and mathematics and all this good STEM stuff. And we've only done this we did it with 5 classrooms last year and 5 this year. We would love to expand that to 10, 15, maybe even 20 classrooms. As you can imagine, there's a decent little amount of cost that's involved in building these things and sending them up into the stratosphere, particularly when we're talking about multiple launches. So I think, if this thing goes off and we're able to raise the money, we can expand this to a lot more rural areas and do a lot more interesting work with it.
I'd love to just mention something on the assistive technology side. So when we're talking about assistive tech, Working in multiple school districts, some of the wealthiest counties teams, and they have access to equipment. And I will say, working in some of those counties, it still is difficult to go through the process and get a student matched appropriately many times. But when you're talking about these rural areas, there is no team. So you're relying on your special educator who has a large caseload to figure out the technology and then try to find funding just to trial it with a student. So if you're talking about like a communication device, there's multiple types of programs that a student can use, and they vary greatly. So you really want the opportunity for a student to interact with the type of technology to see if it's going to work for them before trying to find the funding for it. So something that we have created several times, and I would love to do much more of, is an assistive tech lending library. And this is giving a district, essentially, some of them are carts, some are closets, but it's just an array of assistive tech, communication devices, adaptive equipment, vision technology, hearing technology, so that students can be appropriately trialed for things that will allow them to access just not even technology and advanced things, but their regular curriculum, access to the core content that they need so that they can work with that equipment and find what works for them. And then they can be able to be matched with personal equipment. So if you match a student with a communication device, which we often do, that device is going to be with that student throughout either elementary school into middle school until they're older. So the impact is enormous. But these lending libraries are incredibly, incredibly helpful to districts just to find the best path forward for all of our students.
Thank you, Chris and Claire, for just spending a few minutes today talking about RTF. Thank you for participating with us at Rejection Con. And I'm just excited about this year. And I wanted to make sure we even said it. So, Rejection Con next year is going to be February 17th, 18th, and 19th. So, mark your calendars for it. If folks want to get involved in the Rural Tech Fund, maybe we'll just close on this. How can they get in touch with you? And how can an individual MSP help the RTF mission, whether it's through Rejection Con or on their own?
For sure. Yeah. The easiest way to get in touch with me or Claire is through ruraltechfund.org. There's a contact form on the website. There's a couple of ways to engage. I'll say, first of all, if you're in one of these rural areas and you happen to know a school and there are teachers who you think could benefit from the work we're doing and integrating these things into their classroom, it's a very simple product. There's an application. They fill it out. It goes to me and Claire. We review every single one of them, usually within a few weeks, and make decisions. And there have been cases where someone applied and they've got a check in hand by Friday. So in the right situation, we can make those things happen and help people very quickly. Beyond that, our work is supported by the funding that we raise. It's really a direct correlation from the amount of money we raise to the amount of classrooms that we can help. So if MSPs want to help and be involved with that, certainly they can when that comes around. If they're itching to do that this year, don't wait. You can donate directly through our website. We can arrange some other means of doing that if it's necessary. There's also some interesting opportunities to work with kind of partners in local areas to make sure we're using the funding in a way that's conducive with some of those local employer goals.
I love it. Well, Chris and Claire, thank you for joining us today. And Bob and Eric, and on behalf of the rest of the Rejection Con team, thank you all so much for this time together. We're looking super forward to Rejection Con coming up next year.